Hello everyone, this is Alyssa Ousley and I'm here today to present on secondary traumatic stress. First and foremost, I would like to define trauma as this is the basis for our presentation today. So trauma is the psychological response to a distressing or disturbing event. It is subjective in that the experience can be associated with a wide range of symptoms, but also that what might be traumatic for one person might not be traumatic for someone else, even if they both experience the same traumatic event. So, for example, when I was in about first or second grade, I experienced the 9/11 attacks. For me, I was very far away from where it happened. I only saw it briefly on the news, and my parents brought it up to me in a conversation, but that's really all I heard about it. For someone else that was there at the Twin Towers, their experience was a lot more intense than mine was, and therefore they might be experiencing that associated symptoms way more intensely than I did. Some examples of traumas might include child maltreatment, domestic violence, sexual assault, natural disasters, traumatic loss, and exposure to violence. Obviously, this list isn't inclusive and that there could be a lot more traumatic events that could be added, but here are just a few examples. For those that experience traumatic events, the following is some of the symptomology that they might experience. And so when you have clients come in, they might tell you that they have had recent nightmares or trouble sleeping, intrusive thoughts, trouble remembering parts of what's happened to them. So for example, they might be able to tell you what day an event happened, but they can't tell you the place that it occurred at. They might feel easily startled, feeling scared for no reason, avoidant in that they don't want to go around certain places or people that remind them or trigger them of the event that they've endured. They might feel disoriented in that they kind of erase what's happened to them. So, for example, there might be police reports or there might be evidence that this event's happened to them, but they have kind of wiped it clean from their memory, and they'll tell you, I don't know what you're talking about, or I don't recall. They might be feeling alert, overly alert. They have changes in their sleep or eating patterns. Maybe they don't want to eat at all, or maybe they're eating a lot. Nausea, headaches and body pain, or extreme emotions. As a direct care provider, you will be consistently exposed to individuals who have experienced a great deal of trauma. You will be hearing stories of abuse, neglect, and assault on a repeated basis. When our roles encompass so much crisis intervention, it does take a toll on our bodies and our minds. Secondary traumatic stress is the natural consequent behaviors and emotions resulting from knowing about a traumatizing event experienced by a significant other, or in this case, the client that is in front of you. It results from empathic connection, so you're really trying to empathize and be sincere in your emotions with the client. It's very similar to PTSD and the effects, even though you are not directly experiencing the trauma. SDS can be fairly immediate, so for example, you might hear a client tell you about some of the abuse they endured, and then you go home an hour later and you might be thinking about that story all night long. It can impact you even after you leave the session, so even after the story is done, you might experience SDS for a day, a week, even months after the fact. And it's very strongly associated with burnout. So the more stories that you hear that are traumatic, the more likely you are to just feel burned out from going to work every day and hearing the same sad stories over and over and over again. Burnout is the experience by individuals and organizations that's typified by high demands and low rewards. It's reduced feelings of accomplishment, and it's due to general occupational stress. You can experience burnout even if you've never worked with a traumatic environment. So, for example, you can experience burnout in a restaurant industry. If you go to work every single day and you work really, really, really hard and people just aren't tipping you, you're going to experience high demands and very low rewards. One may no longer enjoy this activity, especially after a longer period of time. So it's not something that happens overnight or probably even within a week, but it's something that happens gradually. So the longer you work at that restaurant and the more you experience not getting the tips that you're wanting or the desired outcome, the more likely you are to experience burnout. One way that you can combat burnout is by having good coping skills and having a regular self-care routine. Compassion fatigue. This is the result from empathetic caregiving, exposure to the suffering of others, combined with life demands. It's basically juggling your life with the life of your clients. It's exhaustion from giving because you are constantly working on not only your own family life and your own personal life, but you're also trying to help this client find employment, maybe housing, maybe giving them resources for clothing, whatever it might be. And so you're constantly giving them ideas, you're problem solving, and you're validating their experiences. So you're giving, giving, giving. It might have nothing to do with the trauma, but rather from giving too much, and it can over time drain you very emotionally. Additionally, if you've, let's say, worked or volunteered with a client in this kind of environment for a long period of time, it can become an occupational hazard in the sense that, let's say that a client has been with Safe Place not once or twice, but maybe 12 times, and you know that when you heard their name and that they were coming in for an intake today, you decided, I'm not going to ask them all their questions. They're only going to be here for a day or two anyway, so how about I cut their intake in half, or maybe shorten it by 15 minutes because I already know that they're not going to be with us very long. Basically, you're taking shortcuts. It's really important that you don't cheat the work and that you do your absolute best for every single client. And one way to do that is by recognizing signs and symptoms of compassion fatigue ahead of time, so that way you can implement a lot of self-care and a lot of good support systems to help you push through and to give your absolute best every single day. Some of the warning signs for service providers is recognizing if you're having difficulty sleeping. Are you thinking about clients at night? Are you thinking about the story they said? Or are you thinking about problem solving for them? Are you putting in more effort than they are? Do you have headaches? Increased susceptibility to illness? Increased use of alcohol or drugs? Anger and irritability at home and or at work? Avoidance of clients, colleagues, or social events? Feeling helpless when hearing a difficult client story? I put in there imposter syndrome because sometimes we might hear a story from a client about how they don't have housing, employment, a vehicle. They might not even have their ID. And so you just feel so overwhelmed by their story that you don't even know where to start. And in reality, you do. You've been trained. You know the resources, and you know that the first and foremost thing that you need to do is just be there and to listen to the client. You might comprise care for clients in the sense, like, again, you might be taking shortcuts. It might become difficult to separate personal and professional lives, and you might have a diminished sense of enjoyment for your job. The two most important ways to prevent secondary traumatic stress, burnout, and compassion fatigue are to have good support systems and to implement self-care on a regular basis. With support systems, it would be vital to have both internal and external supports. Your external supports would be those people that do not work in the environment that you work in. These could be your family members, your friends, or maybe your significant other. And they would be the people that you do not talk about work-related topics with. You could tell them about how your day went, but obviously you would want to spend more time talking about hobbies, interests, family, anything that's not work-related. Your internal support systems would be the people at work that you would talk about work-related topics with. These could be your supervisor, someone in HR, or maybe even your colleagues. They're there to bounce ideas off of one another, give you suggestions, and then also to help you recognize if you're having a stressful day or if you're starting to express some of the symptoms that we reported earlier as warning signs. It's also a good idea to use your supervision as a way to kind of debrief after a hard conversation that you've had with a client. As a reminder, the information that happens at Safe Place, such as with a client that's sharing their story with you, is confidential material and should not be shared with external support systems. So for example, if you are working with a client who just told you about her abuse, you would not then go and share with your brother that this client, whose name is Jane Doe and has 2 kids and lives in Battle Creek, just came today into our shelter and told me this story, because that information is confidential. On the other hand, if you were having a hard time and let's say your sister asked you, "What's wrong? You seem really down." You could share that you had a really hard time today at work because you heard a really traumatic story. Something else I would like to share about support systems is to make sure that you're keeping in mind to separate both personal and professional lives. I used to work in the restaurant industry, and often after a long shift, all of the waitresses and waiters would get together and have a drink and talk about their day. While at surface value that seems like an okay thing to do because you're decompressing after a long day, not only was it bad in the sense that the same people I just worked a 10-hour shift with, now we're still hanging out and we're not separating that work and personal life separation, but I'm also engaging in more talk about my tough day. With self-care, it's really important that you dedicate every single day some time to replenish yourself, especially in this work environment. And I want to also stress the importance of putting the self in self-care. When I used to identify examples of self-care, I used to share that I would play games with my sister, or I would hang out with friends, or for example, I'd take my dog for a walk. But all of those things don't just benefit me, they benefit someone else. Therefore, they're not putting the self in self-care. Now, don't get me wrong, I know that there are benefits in hanging out with other people and that dogs can be a great way to make you feel better. But at the same time, if you've gone to a long day of work and you're giving, you're still giving when you sit there and take a walk with your best friend and you're telling her everything about what's going on. You're still not, I guess, replenishing yourself, but you're also in some sense still giving. So making sure that, yes, it's okay if you spend time with a loved one, but also making sure you spend time with yourself and replenishing your own needs. If you have any questions about STS, burnout, or compassion fatigue, feel free to let me know. Also, you guys should be given a worksheet on support systems and self-care strategies to help you pinpoint what areas are some of your strengths and what areas you might need to work on. Thank you all for listening, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.